Meet Brülosophy contributor Alex, a self-proclaimed cheapskate brewer.
Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm a cheapskate brewer.
Alex does all sorts of things to keep brewing economical.
So I do no-chill, CO2 capturing, I reuse bank yeast, RO filter my own water.
So we're going to look at 3 of Alex's ingenious methods for saving money on homebrewing and show you how you can adopt them too. This episode is sponsored by Kegland. More on them in a bit. When Alex first joined Brülosophy, he was mainly bottling his beers. So when he started getting into kegging, rather than purchasing a CO2 tank and a regulator, he built what he calls the Shank Tank.
The Shank Tank is pretty simple. All you need to do is take a empty keg and add a sugar water solution. It can be as low as just 10-20 OG, and add something like champagne yeast to this sugar water solution. Slap on a spunding valve and hold it to something like 30 psi, and you can use it for something like purging your tanks, doing transfers, and so on.
So the sugar water ferments, creating CO2, which is stored in the keg. And I asked Alex how to build one.
Yeah, what I'll actually do is tear out the liquid line from the tank, so that I effectively have 2 gas posts on the corny keg, and then put a spunding valve on one of them, and then the other one I can, put a quick disconnect on. I do spunding so it doesn't get too wild. Sometimes I do 30 if it's just going to be a really quick, I need it the next day kind of thing, but if it's sitting around a while, I usually do 60 psi.
So we've got a 5-gallon keg, 2 gas posts, and a spunding valve. When adding the water, you'll only want to fill the keg about halfway.
You don't want the tank to be completely full of liquid because you want there to be gas in it. So I only fill up the tank 2 gallons or so for a 5-gallon corny keg.
Then Alex will add half a pound of table sugar per gallon of water, a touch of yeast nutrient, and a packet of dry yeast, typically champagne yeast.
In my head, one of the perks of it too is that if you use something like champagne yeast, it's known for producing sulfur, so you might have CO2 with a little bit of an antioxidant compound mixed into it too.
And the Shank Tank is reusable. When the pressure is running low, all you need to do is add more sugar and yeast nutrient.
So when it kind of gets a little bit low, I'll pop open the corny keg lid, add some sugar and yeast nutrient, and let it build itself up. In my experience, if you just keep adding nutrient every time you add sugar to it, the yeast is more than happy to get going.
The liquid in the Shank Tank, that sounds a little bit like hard seltzer to me, which begs the question, Alex, have you tasted it?
Tasted it? No, I should, shouldn't I? I've got some, not too far away. I could just try it now.
The more I chatted with Alex about his Shank Tank, the more the idea appealed to me. My last CO2 refill cost like $40 just for a small cylinder, and I'm going through a lot of CO2, and a good portion of that CO2 is used for purging kegs. I'll fill a keg with water and sanitizer, then use CO2 to purge the liquid out, leaving the keg filled with CO2 rather than air, ready to receive my beer from my fermenter. Contraption number 2 from Alex addresses exactly this scenario.
Yeast produces way more CO2 than it needs. So for a typical fermentation, I'll grab the corny keg that I ferment in and daisy chain 3 other kegs to this one chain, filling the first keg after the fermenter with star sand. Then I hook up all the gas lines together, and then on the 4th keg, I add a spunding valve set at just something like 5 psi, and let the star sand drip out of there. And when all 3 of the non-fermentation kegs are totally empty of sanitizer, I unplug it.
So 3 kegs sanitized and purged, all using CO2 from a fermentation. I was curious about how long it takes the sanitizer to travel through all of the kegs.
If I do 1 keg, it'll be done in about 24 hours. If it's 2 kegs, it'll be done about a day and a half. If it's 3 kegs, it's a little over 2 days.
Now those PET kegs, the quick disconnects, and the spunding valve used by Alex, they're all purchased from today's sponsor, Kegland. Kegland are the ultimate destination for all your brewing and dispensing requirements. For example, those PET kegs are the reusable Oxybar kegs, which are perfect for sharing beer with friends. I'm a big fan of the versatile Duo-Tight system for liquid and gas hookups, and I serve my beers through Nuka Tap draft beer taps. Kegland also have a killer YouTube channel hosted by Key, where you can learn all about their latest products. Check out all Kegland have to offer at kegland.com.au. Now, the third of Alex's contraptions addresses yeast starters, which I rarely find myself making because I'm never prepared enough to create them ahead of brew day. But Alex has a solution to that.
You can make the yeast starter on the day of brewing just by mashing your beer as normal, and after the mash, when the beer is close to boiling, say 200 degrees Fahrenheit, you can just rack that wort straight into your flasks or Nalgene bottles if you wish. And that saves you time for making a starter the day before. And you can grab as much as you want with this method too, since you're drawing from a full batch.
So this saves on the time and expense of boiling and chilling DME to create wort for your starter, or purchasing pre-canned wort. Now this is really more of a vitality starter than a traditional yeast starter, as the yeast won't have a ton of time to propagate, but it fits perfectly with Alex's overnight chilling method.
So I'll make the starter, while the full batch is chilling overnight, and 24 hours will pass with that post-mash starter.
Alex mentioned he racks the hot wort to Nalgene bottles, and I did wonder about the safety of that.
Yeah, Nalgene bottles are made of Trident plastic, so they're able to handle boiling temperatures just fine. It's the reason I use Nalgene.
Before adding the yeast to the collected wort, that wort will need to be chilled, so how does Alex do that?
I tend to just let it sit on the counter for about 30 minutes, and it gets pretty cold because those 48-ounce Nalgene bottles are a bit of a long tube, so they chill from the air pretty quickly. And then if I get impatient, I just throw them in the fridge while they're, 100-something degrees, warm enough for me to touch.
Now, the wort in yeast starters is typically agitated with a stir plate. So, does Alex use a fancy stir plate?
Yeah, no, I'm a cheapskate, so of course I have the 3 Nalgene bottles just sitting next to my stove, and I just give them a shake whenever I walk by.
Finally, I was curious as to why Alex was collecting wort in 3 Nalgene bottles when he only needs 1 for the yeast starter.
When I mentioned about the 3 Nalgene bottles, I tend to grab 1 bottle, dump it into the beer, 1 bottle, dump it in the shank tank, and then the 3rd bottle I use that to harvest the yeast.
Yes, the shank tank can also be powered with collected wort rather than table sugar, and at this point it should be of no surprise to anybody that Alex is also harvesting his yeast. But his process for that, along with a host of his other thrifty practices, is probably best left for another video. It's methods like these 3 that make homebrewing so much fun, and I'd love to hear about your own cheapskate brewing hacks in the comment section. Thank you, Alex, for sharing yours. One of my favorite hacks is to freeze yeast and store it in the freezer for years, and you can learn how to do that in this video here.